Hello and welcome to this on-demand session on T-level assessment readiness. This CPD session was previously done as a live workshop, and now we've created this on-demand session so that for those who aren't able to attend can still benefit from insights to support them in their teaching and delivery planning for the next academic year. So now my name is Tracy Hutchinson and I'm a Provider Development Officer. And my role, along with Gemma and Elena, is to support our providers in the teaching and delivery of the health and science, education and early years T-levels. So Gemma and Elena are the education and early years provider development officers, and I am the provider development officer for the health and science TQs. So throughout this session you will hear from all three of us some strategies to support you in assessment readiness. Let's first explore our session objectives. So first of all, it's all about exploring how to embed assessment into T-level delivery. And we're going to look at some really key areas. So we're going to explore embedding ESP marking criteria into teaching and learning, how we can use core exam assessment structures to build student success. We'll explore preparing for occupational specialism assessments through teaching strategies, and finally how quality delivery through assessment informed planning. So a moment for you to consider. How confident do you feel about embedding assessment criteria in your teaching? So have a moment to consider at this stage how you feel. So on our recent workshop, here you can see our average score out of 5. So 69% people were 3 out of 5. So really in the middle, not very confident, but not really unconfident either. Does this sort of mirror how you feel? So hopefully by the end of this session, you will be able to score yourself higher.
So the first area we're going to be looking at is how to embed ESP marking criteria into your teaching and learning. During the live session, we started by asking participants which of the assessment objectives they find the most challenging to teach. We'll have a look at the results of this on the next slide. So you can see here that overwhelmingly, AO2 and AO5 were considered to be the most challenging to teach, with AO3 in third place. There seemed to be very few issues around the planning or embedding the English, maths and digital skills. So if you weren't attending the live session, have a think about whether you agree with this, whether your own views align with those of the other participants, and which of these assessment objectives you also find more challenging to embed into delivery. So let's take a moment to think about what these objectives actually mean for the students. So we'll start with AO1, which is the left-hand column here. So students need to be able to plan their approach to meeting a project brief. This means they need to understand the project requirements and how to tackle them. They need to be able to create a logical plan or timeline and identify what success is going to look like. In terms of how you as a teacher could help, you could provide some scaffolds for planning, for example, Gantt charts or to-do lists, and model how to interpret a project brief. Now moving on to AO2, the second column, which is applying core knowledge and skills. So here students need to use their relevant subject knowledge and their skills to develop a project and apply what they've learned in the classroom to solve problems or develop ideas. Again, as a teacher, you could help by clarifying for the students what core knowledge actually means in their T-level route and provide examples of how that knowledge might be applied. Next, AO3, which is the middle column here, students need to be able to select relevant techniques and resources to meet a brief. So that means choosing the right resources or processes for a task and showing decision making based on the brief's needs. And here you as a teacher could help by demonstrating different methods and discussing their pros and cons and encouraging students to justify their choices. AO4 is about using English, maths and digital skills appropriately. So students here need to be able to communicate clearly, both written and verbally. And they need to be able to use maths for planning and analysing data, and use digital tools for research, creation or presentations. As a teacher, you could help here by ensuring that English, maths and digital skills are always embedded into project-based activities, and potentially offer mini lessons on key skills needed for a project. And then finally, AO5 is about realising a project outcome and reviewing how well the outcome meets the brief. So students here would need to be able to produce a final piece of or a product, for example, a plan or a report, and they would need to reflect on how well it meets the brief's aims and suggest improvements. So teachers here could help by providing feedback throughout the project process and modelling reflective thinking and review processes. So now we've had a quick look at the skills that students are expected to be able to do in relation to each of the assessment objectives. It's worth taking a little bit of time to consider how you as a teacher develop these skills throughout your core delivery. So have a minute now to think about, are there any specific activities or tasks that you use that you would be able to share with colleagues to develop practice? Or how do you embed the ESP marking criteria into activities throughout your teaching? So during the live session, we used Padlet to allow participants to share their ideas and suggestions as to how they do develop some of these ESP skills throughout their delivery. So some of these are specific activities or tasks that people use, and some of them relate to how different teachers embed the ESP marking criteria into the activities. So it might be worth taking a few minutes to read through some of these suggestions. So moving on from this, we do understand that students can find ESP assessments quite a challenge and something that is quite unfamiliar to them at first. So it could be useful to create a checklist such as the one on the screen here to help students to break down the assessment objectives and to make sure that they have included everything into their work. This example here could easily be adapted, for example, using AI. You could make it more specific to a particular program or to a relevant project brief. But using a checklist like this can help students in several ways. Firstly, it can help to translate technical or abstract language into simpler terms and making it easier for students to understand what's expected of them. Also, when students use a checklist to monitor their own work, they're actively engaging with the criteria rather than passively receiving feedback, and this can help embed the expectations and vocabulary used in the ESP. A checklist also allows students to evaluate their own progress and identify areas for improvement before submitting their work. This then helps them become more familiar with how their performance will be judged. And over time, regular use of a checklist helps build students' ability to interpret and apply the criteria independently. And lastly, familiarisation with the marking criteria can help students focus their efforts more effectively, therefore increasing the likelihood that their work meets the standards expected in the ESP. You might also find it useful to create some student-friendly marking grids, as this could help them to understand the marking criteria for each of the bands within the ESP. So the example here was taken from an education in early years intervention plan marking grid. And this has been adapted so that the students have a simplified checklist on the right-hand side there. And you could ask them to mark an intervention plan. That could be an exemplar one, or their own, or a peer one against these checkpoints. I would start at perhaps the 5 to 8 or the 9 to 12 criteria, and then move up and down to the next band depending on what has been met at the current band. And this can help clarify some of the more technical or complex wording of the criteria. And also it helps to break it down rather than it being a chunk of text. It helps to break it down into little tick boxes, and the students can then see if all of the tick boxes have been completed, they would move up to the next band. It can help them to analyse their own work quite effectively. And this is just an example of the lower band, the 1 to 4 marks, with a student-friendly checklist on the right-hand side. Again, just broken down into sort of more easy to understand chunks, which can help them with self and peer marking. Now looking at how we can use peer feedback tools to improve students' understanding of the ESP marking language. So once the students have used the marking grids and decided on a marking band for a piece of work, they could use some specific sentence starters to help them to identify the strengths and the areas for development for a task. So some examples here for AO1. For the planning section, a sentence starter could be, you have shown a clear understanding of the brief by, and then the students could give their peers a suggested area of strength taken from the student-friendly marking grid on the previous slides. And then they can think of an area for development. For example, next time, try to add more detail to your plan by. And again, they can use the marking grids that we've already had a look at to pick out some areas that maybe haven't been ticked off, and they can use those ones as the areas for development. So this can be really helpful in peer marking, but also in students looking at their own work and thinking, what have they missed? What do they need to develop a little bit more? And often using these sentence starters can help them to put it into a context and think about how they can improve their own work. So this slide demonstrates how feedback can be given by students to their peers using the student-friendly checklists and the sentence starters that we've just previously discussed. So the student on the left here has chosen to feedback on AO1 of planning. So they've said that you've shown a clear understanding of the brief by covering the majority of the requirements of an intervention plan. And that's just taken from the marking criteria. And then they've said that next time, try to add more detail to your plan by using all of the information available. Again, taken from the student-friendly checklist. And the student on the right has focused on AO2 applying knowledge. So their feedback is, you have used your knowledge of, and you can insert the topic here, effectively when you covered some technical terminology, and consider developing your understanding of educational theories further by referencing them in your work. So it's quite a nice way for students to come up with constructive feedback for each other that is relevant to the ESP marking criteria and not too overwhelming as it's broken down into clearly structured checklists. So to pull all of this together during the live session, we went into breakout rooms and completed a task where participants read through a short student exemplar reflection piece from the ESP. They then applied a student-friendly checklist to be able to mark the task according to the criteria, and then used some of the suggested sentence starters to create feedback for the student. So this is a task that you may want to have a go at yourself. You can find exemplar tasks and student materials on the main qualification page on the NCFA website. And then you can apply a student-friendly checklist. I would recommend that you use the mark scheme and use AI to ask it to break it down into a student-friendly checklist for you. It's quite simple to do, and it's worth experimenting with because it's something that you would be able to develop and use in your teaching. And then use some of the suggested sentence starters, and you may well come up with additional ones of your own to create feedback for the student. And think about how you can use this technique to really develop this and use it more frequently in the classroom, just to get students really becoming more familiar with the marking criteria and how this applies to their own work.
In this next section, we'll focus on practical strategies to support students' success in their core exams. We'll explore techniques that strengthen knowledge recall, develop extended responses, and build exam confidence, all aligned with the assessment objectives. The aim here is to equip students not only with the right content, but also with the skills and structure to express their knowledge clearly, accurately, and effectively under exam conditions. Let's begin by looking at some key insights drawn from Chief Examiner's reports, which can be highly valuable in shaping both teaching and assessment strategies. First, a report helps us identify common student mistakes. They highlight areas where students typically struggle, whether due to misunderstanding, omission, or weak application. For instance, one recurring issue noticed was that many learners failed to apply knowledge to a real setting. Insights like this can inform how we scaffold application tasks in lessons. Second, they help us translate examiner feedback into actionable teaching strategies. Comments in the reports often suggest the need for clearer structure, better use of subject-specific terminology, and a stronger emphasis on evaluation over description. These are practical points we can embed into both teaching materials and classroom discussion. Thirdly, they reveal the characteristics of high-scoring responses. This gives us a benchmark to share with students. For example, stronger responses were noted for their use of technical vocabulary and for evaluating impact, not just describing it. Using exemplar materials that reflect these strengths can help students better understand what success really looks like. Next, the reports clarify assessment objectives, showing where marks are typically gained or lost. This might include, for AO1, where there are knowledge and understanding gaps, AO2, where there may be limited or absent real-world examples, or for AO3, where there may be a weak or missing evaluation. Having this breakdown enables more targeted intervention and feedback. Finally, these reports offer guidance to improve students' exam technique. They highlight the importance of clarity, evidence-based responses, and structure under timed conditions. These are skills we can build through formative practice. In short, Chief Examiner reports are a powerful professional resource, supporting both curriculum planning and our students' achievement. This next slide outlines a simple two-step strategy for supporting students from recall to extended response. First, we activate knowledge recall. You could do this by using retrieval grids, quizzes, or flashcard apps. Techniques like last lesson, last week, and last term, using questioning and dual coding to help reinforce memory. Then we can move into active learning to apply that knowledge. This might include problem-based learning, role-play scenarios, or case study jigsaws, where students collaborate to piece together different parts of a task. The aim here is to build fluency and confidence through meaningful applied practice. Building on recall and active learning, the next step is to strengthen analysis and reasoning. Approaches like Socratic seminars, question webs, and evidence walls help students dig deeper into connections and structure their thinking more clearly. Finally, we can then move into independent extended responses. You could use paragraph scaffolds like AO1 to AO3 or PEEL. You could model live writing with student input and encourage the use of AI tools for drafting and feedback, ethically of course. Peer review methods such as gallery walks also support refinement and self-assessment. This sequence helps students transition from surface recall to confident extended writing. This next slide breaks down what top band responses require for extended response questions. Firstly, students need to demonstrate in-depth knowledge at AO1 using accurate terminology and clear definitions. Next, they should apply that knowledge to context for AO2, so linking their ideas to real-world examples or relevant case studies. And finally, to reach the highest level, they need to be able to analyse and evaluate at AO3. Here they need to explain their reasons, weigh up arguments, and identify impacts or implications. You can see from this that there's a clear progression from knowledge to thoughtful and applied evaluation. Let's look in more depth at what high-level responses look like for AO1 and AO2. For AO1, comprehensive knowledge, students need secure understanding, correct use of specialist vocabulary, and reference to relevant theories or legislation. Responses must be accurate and specific, for example, referring to the EYFS framework or the Health and Safety at Work Act. For AO2, which is effective application, students should apply knowledge to the question context using realistic sector-specific examples. Generic answers won't meet the standard. For instance, in a healthcare setting, clear documentation reducing medication errors is a strong, purposeful application. These are the foundations of top band responses for AO1 and AO2. This slide focuses on AO3 high-level analysis and evaluation and the importance of clear structure. Strong AO3 responses explore how and why something matters. They weigh up strengths and limitations and use evidence to support balanced reasoning. For example, a student might argue that while flexible routines promote independence, they may also increase anxiety in children who need structure. Equally important is organised logical structure. Top responses follow a clear line of reasoning with effective sequencing, appropriate academic tone, and technical accuracy in grammar and spelling. Together, these elements distinguish the highest level answers. This next slide shows a simple but powerful strategy for helping students break down extended responses using colour coding. Each assessment objective is matched with a colour and a specific action. AO1 here is blue. State what you know, which is definitions, key terms, legislations and processes. For AO2, it's green. Here we apply it, using real-life examples, scenarios or workplace settings to show relevance. And AO3 is red. Evaluate or analyse, looking at impact, strengths and weaknesses, and consequences. This colour coding can be used in model answers, peer feedback, or student drafting to make the structure and purpose of each part of a response clearer. It's also a helpful tool for making marking more transparent. You might want to pause the recording here and try the colour coding approach yourself. Step 1. Start by reading the extended response on the right. As you read, identify where each assessment objective appears, using the colour coding at the bottom. AO1 is key knowledge, so look for definitions, legislation and principles. AO2 is application. Where can you see that the learner has linked ideas to real-world settings? And AO3 is evaluation, so the analysis of effectiveness, risks or impact. Once you've identified the AOs, take a moment to reflect on how this kind of model response could be used in your own delivery. For example, as part of modelling peer assessment, or to build writing scaffolds. This exercise is designed to strengthen familiarity with what top band responses look like and how we can support our learners to achieve them. During the live session, we used Padlet to interactively annotate a sample extended response. What you see here is a screenshot of the outcome, where each colour highlights a different assessment objective as identified by participants. This kind of collaborative task worked really well for reinforcing understanding of AO1, 2 and 3. It also sparked some really good discussion around how and where different skills show up in students' writing. You could easily adapt this for your own students. Choose a model response and ask your learners to identify the assessment objectives using colour coding. They could do this either digitally, using a tool like Padlet, or on paper with some simple highlighters. It's a great way to deepen their understanding of what high-quality responses look like and how to structure their own work. To support your students with structuring extended responses, these planning acronyms provide both scaffolding and clarity. Each one is aligned with different types of tasks, like evaluation, discussion, explanation, or comparison, and includes prompts linked to the relevant assessment objectives. For example, Judge helps students build an evaluative response, moving from stating facts at AO1 to applying knowledge at AO2, and then weighing up pros and cons and justifying a final opinion at AO3. Impact guides students through assessing a topic by identifying key ideas, linking to context, and analysing both sides before reaching a conclusion. Trace is great for explanation-style responses, helping learners move from a definition to a real-world application and a consequence. Share supports structured discussion by encouraging balanced reasoning. And Twin is useful for comparison tasks, prompting students to weigh up two options, both clearly and fairly. These acronyms can be introduced during planning or revision and gradually withdrawn as learners gain confidence with structure and independence. They're great tools for modelling, peer assessment, or targeted writing support.
Now we're going to explore preparing for occupational specialism assessments through teaching strategies. So let's take a moment to explore how using past assignment briefs can directly inform and strengthen our curriculum planning. Why does this matter? Well, occupational specialist assessments are designed to be practical, scenario-based and cumulative. They're not isolated tasks. They build on real-world skills and they mirror professional practice. Now here's the key point. The assignment briefs gives us far more than the mark scheme ever could. They show us the depth, the context and competencies expected of learners. When we look closely at these briefs, we start to see what successful learners actually need to be able to do, not just what they need to know. So how do we use that? By planning backwards from the briefs. That means using them as a starting point to shape our curriculum design, map our skill progression and embed formative assessment along the way. This ensures that we're not just preparing students for the assessment, but actually scaffolding the knowledge and behaviours they'll need to succeed throughout the course. So if you're reviewing or redesigning your delivery for next year, start with the briefs. They're a goldmine for planning with purpose. Let's now take a closer look at this powerful curriculum planning tool of backward design approach. We start by reading past assignment briefs, so assignment 1, 2 and 3 where applicable, and working backwards from there. What we're looking for in those briefs are three key things: the practical competencies learners are being assessed on, any expectations around professional behaviours or reflection, and the format of the evidence, whether that's written reports, presentations or observed tasks. Once we've identified those, we map them directly to our curriculum end goals and build the delivery sequence around them. Next, we extract key themes. Are they recurring sector tasks like infection control, communication or problem solving? What cognitive demands are being placed on learners? Are they being asked to apply knowledge, justify actions or evaluate scenario? This analysis helps us to build assessment style practice tools across the year, so learners are not seeing the format for the first time in their summative assessment. Next, we use briefs to set milestones. We break the bigger assessment expectations into termly or half-termly goals. That allows us to build up to those assessments with targeted activities like simulations, peer presentations, reflective journals and sector-specific writing tasks. Another important element of backward design is bringing sector context into delivery as early as possible. Assignment briefs are full of rich, authentic scenarios. Don't save those until the final term. Use them now. For example, if the brief involves a mental health setting, introduce the terminology, roles and responsibilities from the setting into your teaching early on. This gives learner context and relevance, and it starts to build familiarity with sector expectations in a meaningful way. And finally, as learners build that sector familiarity, we want to gradually develop their independence. We're not replicating the assignments, but we can mirror their format. That might mean using group planning tools, introducing professional documentation like observation logs or referral forms, or using role plays and evidence gathering exercises. Importantly, we want to give the learners structured exposure before slowly reducing scaffolding over time. That's what helps them build both confidence and competence. To bring the backward design strategy to life, here's a practical example of how you might map an actual assignment brief into your curriculum delivery. Let's say the brief scenario focuses on creating a care and support plan, something learners are likely to face in occupational specialism. Here's one way that could be sequenced. Week 4, you introduce person-centered planning as a core concept. Week 6, students engage in a group activity based on a case study, allowing them to begin applying the planning process. Week 9, they individually draft a fictional care plan and receive peer feedback, developing both independence and evaluative skills. Week 11, you guide a tutor-led review using a simplified version of the real brief structure. This supports familiarity with expectation and builds confidence before formative assessment. Now, alongside this, we've included some reflection prompts for teachers. Are the skills listed in the brief showing up in your scheme of work by week 10 or week 20? Are students comfortable with the types of decisions or professional language they need to use? And crucially, by the time the assessment arrives, can learners complete a similar task with confidence and independence? These questions can help you review your current delivery plans and adjust pacing or scaffolding to prepare learners. One of the most impactful ways to strengthen learner outcomes in occupational specialism is to embed core competencies early and intentionally. Why does this matter? Well, OS assessments aren't just about knowledge. They expect learners to demonstrate 3 things: technical proficiency in sector-specific tasks, professional behaviours, and effective communication in the workplace context. But here's the catch. These aren't skills that appear overnight. They need to be repeated, contextualised, and built with scaffolded independence. If we only introduce these competencies in the final half term before assessment, we're asking students to learn and apply them under pressure. Instead, by embedding them early in the curriculum, we give learners the time and structure to develop, rehearse and refine. This means that when they do encounter complex assessment tasks later on, they're focused on applying what they've already practiced and not figuring it out for the first time. So as you review your curriculum plans, ask yourself, where do technical skills show up early on? Where are we modelling and expecting professional behaviours? And how are students practicing communication in sector-specific scenarios? The earlier we embed these, the more confident and competent our learners will be. To support early embedding and effective curriculum planning, it's helpful to define what we actually mean by core occupational specialism competencies. Now, these do vary by pathway, but there are clear themes that we see across the board. Let's look at a few examples. In health, we see core competencies like communication with patients or service users, infection prevention and control, making and escalating observation, and demonstrating reflection and professionalism. And in healthcare science, we shift into lab-based proficiency with a focus on following SOPs and lab protocols, accurate data collection and sample processing, record keeping and understanding testing cycles. Over in science, learners are expected to handle equipment confidently and safely, apply risk assessment and health and safety practices, report findings clearly and with data integrity, and maintain accurate lab logs. In education early years, we focus on communication with children, families and professionals, supporting hygiene and safety in the setting, observing and responding to children's needs, and maintaining professional conduct through reflective practice. What's important here is that none of these are abstract skills. They are embedded in day-to-day scenarios and they're essential for successful OS assessment performance. As you reflect on your own delivery, ask yourself, are these skills being introduced early and revisited often? Do students have structured opportunities to practice them? And are these woven into both your curriculum content and your teaching behaviours? Identifying and planning for these competencies explicitly can transform how prepared learners feel when the real assessment tasks come. Let's now look at some practical strategies that you can use to embed OS competencies right from the start of the academic year. Term 1. So this model breaks it down into 5 clear approaches you can implement within your existing curriculum structure. First, we begin by breaking down competencies into micro skills. So rather than treating something like effective verbal communication as a broad skill, we deconstruct it into teachable actions like role-playing greetings, explaining procedures clearly, or confirming someone's understanding. These become manageable, accessible chunks, and students can practice regularly. Second, we introduce key language and templates early. We know that scenario-specific vocabulary and documentation can be a barrier, so don't wait until the assessment to introduce these. Start with referral forms, care plan templates, lab reports, or everyday classroom tools. This way they become familiar and less intimidating. Thirdly, we create low-stakes environments for practice. Think simulations, classroom walkthroughs, or structured role plays. For example, learners could practice escalation protocols in fictional scenarios, receiving peer feedback in a supportive setting. This helps build fluency and confidence before they're assessed. Fourth, we build in weekly or fortnightly routines. Reflection logs, hygiene audits, or observation checklists can be baked in your lesson starters or plenaries. These repeated routines create muscle memory, so learners start to feel comfortable and capable using sector language and behaviours consistently. And finally, we link competencies to the real world of work. This might be through guest speakers, sector videos, or simple tutor modelling, showing learners why these skills matter. This helps them connect the dots between the classroom and the workplace and reinforces the professional identity from the very beginning of the course. The earlier these stages are embedded, the more automatic and confident the learner response becomes when assessment times arise. So let's explore an example from the Supporting Therapy Team's Health Occupational Specialism. With the competency will be around working under supervision in a professional environment. So here you can see key term activities across term 1. So week 2, introducing the roles. Week 4, class builds rules of professional behaviours. Week 5, there's a mock MDT meeting. Week 6 to 8, students reflect weekly on their own professional behaviours. So as teachers, here's some questions for you to consider. Are these core competencies visible in weeks 1 to 6 of your scheme work if you were using this example? Are you modelling these behaviours in your own teaching? Do your students recognise these as essential professional standards, not just classroom tasks? One of the most effective ways we can prepare learners for occupational specialism assessment is through project-based learning and simulation. Here's why this really matters. First, OS assessments are not straightforward knowledge checks. They're complex, applied, and professional in format. They simulate the realities of the workplace, and that means learners are being asked to draw on multiple competencies at once. In just one task, a student might need to communicate effectively, demonstrate a technical skill, record data, complete professional documentation, and explain or justify their decision. It's a lot, so we need to prepare them for the integrated challenge. By embedding simulated tasks and project-based learning into our teaching, we're helping learners rehearse this level of complexity. They get the chance to practice in a safe, supported environment and build their confidence. These approaches also allow for formative feedback and peer reflection, which makes them powerful not just for competence, but for learner growth and self-awareness. So as you review your current curriculum, ask yourself, are learners experiencing tasks that feel like the real thing? Are they having to combine skills, work independently, and reflect on their performance? If not, simulation and project-based learning are two great places to start. So let's define PBL, or project-based learning, and simulation. What is project-based learning? So it's a teaching method where students explore real-world applications, challenge their problems over time, resulting in a meaningful product or solution. In the OS context, this could include designing a care plan for a fictional patient, simulating a lab handover and sample analysis, planning an outreach event or awareness campaign, conducting a needs-based risk assessment. What is simulation? So the simulation is the use of role play, scenario enactment, or realistic tasks to mimic what learners would experience in professional practice. So for example, a simulated MDT meeting, practicing recording vital signs, responding to an incident report, or handling equipment or samples in a lab style setting. So let's now look at some specific ways we can translate briefs, assessment briefs, into practical learning experiences, and why that matters so much for OS preparation. We're going to explore 3 practical approaches along with the benefits of each one. First, we can map elements of the assessment brief into project tasks. This means taking the brief, perhaps it's about developing a care plan, and breaking it into a sequence of manageable mini challenges. For instance, students might spend 2 weeks gathering information through simulated interviews, completing observation logs, giving peer feedback, and conducting research. This approach helps students integrate multiple skills, which mirrors what's expected in the assessment. Second, you can design long-term projects that gradually build the evidence required. Here, learners work towards an output that closely mimics the assignment product, thinking of this as assessment rehearsal over time. This can be structured with group discussions, feedback cycles, professional presentation opportunities to really build the sense of independence and ownership. This supports learners in developing their decision making, which directly maps to that higher order thinking. Finally, we can use live or recorded simulation. This could be mock clinics, classroom setup like a ward, a lab-based task. You can simulate professional conditions, language, roles, timings, and give the students the opportunity to act as professionals within realistic constraints. You can even use video recordings for peer or self-review afterwards, and this builds both confidence and familiarity with assessment expectations, reducing anxiety when it's time for the real thing. So let's look at the benefits on the right-hand side of the slides. These approaches mirror how OS assessment integrate multiple skills. They give learning experience in making decisions, working independently, and navigating assessment style environments. And perhaps the most important, they help reduce nerves, because students are practicing the real thing in a low stakes way. Now let's look at practical examples of how simulation can mirror assessment demands without directly replicating the live brief. In this simulation task, students are given a patient referral form and must complete a sequence of integrated tasks. So number 1, prepare a data collection sheet. This introduces structure and planning. 2, conduct a mock physiological measurement, so this is bringing in technical skill. And 3, record findings using sector standard forms, so reinforcing familiarity with documentation. And 4, present their findings verbally to a tutor acting as a clinical supervisor, integrating communication and professional behaviours. This flow mirrors the structure and complexity of the real OS assessment, but importantly, it doesn't copy the brief. It builds the same core competencies in a safe, formative space. Now let's take a moment to reflect as educators. Ask yourself, have I planned simulation activities before learners face the real assignment? Am I giving them enough time to practice combining multiple competencies like communication, accuracy, and reflection? And finally, am I giving feedback on their professional behaviour, not just whether they got the task done? These prompts can really shift how we support students, not just in preparing for assessment, but in becoming confident workplace-ready professionals. One of the most common challenges we hear from educators is this: my learners don't know what good looks like. And it's true. Mark schemes alone rarely help students fully understand the level of depth, detail or quality that's expected in an assessment. That's where exemplar evidence becomes so powerful. When we use exemplars, whether they're full scripts, annotated response or video recordings, we help to demystify expectations. It becomes easier for learners to visualise the difference between a pass and a distinction, or become a competent response and high-level one. But we don't just want to show the exemplars, we want to use them well. That means encouraging learners to evaluate them critically, discussing what makes a response successful or limited, and asking students to reflect on how they can apply those insights in their own planning. When used this way, exemplars build confidence, metacognitive awareness, so thinking about how they learn and perform, and independent planning, which is key to occupational specialism success. So as you plan your assessment preparation activities, think about where exemplar evidence can be embedded, not as an add-on at the end, but as a tool for active learning throughout your delivery. Let's now look at the types of exemplar evidence you might use and how to use them well. On the left, we've listed some common types you may have access to. Annotated samples are particularly useful because they show exactly why marks were awarded. This supports students' understanding of mark scheme and criteria. Unannotated banded examples are powerful for group comparison tasks. Students can apply mark schemes themselves and discuss what they think each response deserves. Paired comparison tasks, where learners look at two pieces side by side, help them develop a sharper eye for detail. For example, what makes this a pass and this a distinction? And video exemplars, where available, can be excellent for modelling professionalism, communication style or body language, especially in vocational or OS context. Now, on the do's and don'ts. Do use a range of levels, not just the top performing ones. Promote comparison and reflection. Focus on the why behind the grade, not just what it scored. Link your feedback to assessment bands so learners get used to the language and structure. Don't only show the top band examples, it can be demotivating and misleading. Let learners simply memorise or imitate exemplar answers. Focus only on grammar or superficial presentation. Give feedback without reference to what's being measured. This approach builds genuine understanding and helps learners to move from imitation to independent assessed competence, which is the ultimate goal. So we've talked about why exemplars matter and the types available. Now let's focus on how to use them effectively in your classroom practice. This slide outlines 4 high-impact approaches you can build into your delivery. 1. What's good and why activities. So show students a range of responses from different bands, perhaps a level 1, a pass and a distinction. Ask them to identify what the learner did well and what's missing. Link their observations to assessment objectives. And crucially, justify their opinions using the language of the mark scheme. This shifts them from passive readers to active assessors and helps develop examiner-style thinking. 2. Mark it like a moderator. Here you give students anonymised responses and the associated criteria. Their job is to assign a band and explain why, just like a moderator would. Follow this with group discussion. How close were they to the actual mark? What did they miss? This helps build their accuracy and reflection skills. 3. Comparison and upgrade. Show students a mid-band example, then pose reflective questions. What needs improving to move up a band? Are they missing sector terms, reasoning or professional behaviours? How would you advise this learner? You can even turn this into a peer feedback task, getting students to coach one another using assessment language. 4. Model with caution. This one's important. Use exemplars to model the level, but not the exact structure. Avoid copying sentence starters or layout features directly into assessment prep. Why? Because we want learners to understand the quality, not just mimic the format. Reinforce that exemplars are just that, examples, not templates. So here's a practical activity you can take straight into the classroom, and it's one that learners will really engage with. We call it Distinction Detective. In this task, students are given 3 short extracts of written reflection. One is distinction, one is pass, and one sits somewhere in the middle. Or maybe one's a level 1, one's a level 3, and one's a level 2 response. In pairs, learners are asked to identify which extract is which, highlight the features that help them decide, suggest 2 improvements for the lowest scoring one, and finally they present their reasoning using band level language, pulling directly from the mark scheme. This task builds confidence in analysis and helps learners internalise what quality looks like, not because they memorise it, but because they've reasoned it out. It also builds peer learning, critical thinking, and familiarity with criteria in a very hands-on way. Now, alongside this activity, I'd encourage you to reflect as teachers. Am I using exemplars from a range of bands and tasks, not just the top ones? Do I create space for learners to critique and discuss together, not just passively read? And most importantly, am I helping them internalise quality without imitation? Because we want students who understand what excellent looks like, not students who just copy and shape of it. The task is set as a step towards exactly that. So now I have a task for you to do. I would like you to design the journey. So this is the activity. Create a term by term, or co-create if you're with a team member, OS preparation strategy using real tasks and ideas from your qualification that incorporates core OS competencies, simulation or project-based learning, use of exemplar evidence, strategies for gradually building independence. Select one key OS task or evidence type from your occupational specialism, so planning an activity, observing a child, living a verbal presentation, justifying a curriculum choice. Build out a preparation journey using columns or notes for the following below. So term 1 or term 2, final prep, simulation or project idea, exemplar evidence tasks, scaffolding to remove over time, early skills and behaviours. We've got a template here on the right hand screen that you could use. And now we're going to show you a quick snapshot for each of the different TQs. So please feel free to pause on each of those that are relevant to the T level that you've delivered to actually explore how you could do that for yourself in your teaching and delivery practice. So this one is an example brief task for education in early years. This one is a health example brief task. This is a healthcare science example brief task. And this is the science example brief tasks. So hopefully exploring these different examples, you can see how we look at scaffolding and supporting the students through simulation, curriculum planning, targeted skills and behaviours, uses of exemplar, and the final task that we want the student to actually do that mirrors that final occupational specialism. Please feel free to use these either as they are to support you in one of the areas that you want to develop, and then please feel free to use these templates to then expand on those to highlight other skills areas or to mirror other OS assessments and help scaffold towards them. So now we're going to explore quality delivery through assessment-informed planning. So this is kind of this final part of your curriculum planning and design to prepare the students for assessments. So let's begin with how to use provider guidance and mark schemes to inform scheme of work. So scheme of work should reflect the endpoint expectation of the qualification. Provided delivery guides or PDGs and mark schemes shows what's assessed, how it's assessed and quality looks like. Use them from the start helps ensure learners are well prepared and that teaching is focused on depth, not just coverage. Let's explore a step-by-step approach to assessment-informed curriculum planning next. So, number 1, start with the tutor guide or provider delivery guidance. Identify each OS task listed and note the skills, behaviours and knowledge expected. Use the guidance to break the task into weekly or termly milestones, check recommended prior learning or teaching points, and clarify assessment types and timings. So if, for example, the guidance says assignment 2 involves a professional discussion on placement, plan regular reflective exercises in term 1 and 2. Step 2, overlay the mark scheme. So look at the assessment objectives or the banded descriptors and ask, what do top band learners do differently? What behaviours or language are rewarded? What's the difference between appropriate and effective application? So a tip here is to pull out key action words from the highest mark bands, such as justifies, analysis, demonstrates, autonomy, and turn them into weekly learner targets. 3. Embed the language of assessment into teaching. Use AO terminology language, so AO1 recall, AO2 apply, AO3 evaluate, for example, or the level banding, as mentioned above, language, as part of your scheme of work and lesson objectives. Build mini assessments or checkpoints that mirror the type of judgments made in the mark scheme. So for example, if the mark scheme rewards evidence of sector language, plan speaking and writing tasks that develop this. 4. Use exemplars alongside guidance and mark schemes. Annotate examples with mark scheme terms. Let students apply the criteria and grade them. Use group activities to rewrite lower band responses. 5. Plan for progression across terms. So term 1, for example, would be knowledge of terminology, understanding of sector context, introduction to task types. Term 2 would be project-based learning, scaffolded responses, mini practical or reflective tasks, and final prep would be independent work, mock tests, peer assessments using simplified mark schemes. Quick questions for you to consider when planning your schemes. Does each term build toward a specific assignment skill? Have I included opportunities for learners to practice what's assessed? Is the language in my scheme of work reflective of the assessment expectations? And do learners understand the difference between meeting and exceeding expectations? So formative assessment should train learners for the real thing, not just check knowledge. Applying the AOs or banding structures and context of summative tasks help learners understand expectation, practice sector language, self-assess progress and reduce anxiety around assessment. So let's have a look at some aligned formative techniques. So 1, you have AO tagged exit tickets, so prompt questions linked to AO1s, AO2, AO3. So for example, what theory did we cover today? How would this apply to X scenario? 2, mini mock movements, 15 to 30-minute versions of assignment tasks, not copied from live briefs. Learners practice presenting, documentation or problem solving with clear time limits. Peer and self-review using simplified mark schemes. 3, scenario starters. Use a short case or problem relevant to the occupational specialism. Ask, what would you do? Why? What evidence would you provide? This build comfort with sector-specific decision making. 4, reflect and rate. After each task, learners reflect using simplified AO-based prompts, or if it's for year 2, banding criteria prompts. What did I recall well? What did I apply to the context and what would I improve? Follow with a confidence rating scale for key criteria. 5. Live AO commenting. While observing practical tasks, provide verbal or written comments using the assessment objectives or the criteria language, such as strong application of sector knowledge. 6. Band ladder tasks. So provide a sample at a level 1 or low grade, a pass, a merit, a distinction, level 4. Learners then work in pairs to identify the band, suggest how to step up to the next level. So time for you to reflect. Are your formative tasks clear stepping stones to the summative task? Do learners recognise assessment language and expectations? And are you building independence and assessment fluency week by week? So one of the most effective ways to boost student confidence is through transparency in assessment criteria. Why does this matter? Well, first, it removes the guesswork. When learners know exactly what's expected, they can focus their effort and approach tasks with clarity and purpose. Second, it enables focused effort. Students can self-assess their work and monitor their progress more accurately, which promotes meaningful learning rather than just task completion. Third, it encourages independence. By understanding their criteria, learners are better equipped to make informed decisions during assessment without relying entirely on teacher input. And finally, it reduces anxiety. When students are familiar with what they will be assessed on, they feel more prepared and less likely to be caught off guard during summative tasks. In short, clear criteria help students feel more confident, capable, and in control of their learning journey. So once we understand why transparency matters, the next step is to implement practical strategies to bring those criteria to life. So first, deconstruct the mark scheme together. What does distinction look like? Highlight verbs in the descriptors, like lists or justifies. And visual displays of things that can be really effective reference points for learners. Second, integrate success criteria into everyday teaching. Use slides in your lessons that refer explicitly to the assessment criteria. This not only helps students understand the task, but connects their learning directly to how well they're assessed. For example, pointing out that using sector vocabulary demonstrates AO2 helps them to make that connection. Third, model and annotate live work. So use real or sample answers and colour code the assessment objectives, perhaps green for AO1, blue for AO2, and red for AO3. And fourth, build self-check and peer assessment into your routine. Sentence starters, simplified rubrics, or reflective questions can empower students to monitor their own progress more independently. And fifth, use what I call assessment language flashbacks. These are short, low-stake activities, maybe weekly, that ask students to apply assessment verbs or phrases in a quick task. It reinforces the familiarity and keeps the language of assessment active in their mind. On the right, I've included an example of how to frame instructions to make criteria visible. Rather than saying, write your observations, you might say, record observations using precise language and accurate units. This demonstrates the assessment criteria and supports higher band performance. This approach explicitly links the task to the mark scheme. So this summarises everything and brings everything together that we have looked at today, from core exams to ESP to occupational specialism and to overall quality planning in your curriculum design. So final questions for you to reflect. Do my learners regularly see and hear the language of the criteria? Are they aware of what success looks like and how to get there? And am I modelling confidence, not just compliance with assessment expectations?
Final thoughts and next steps. As we reach the end of the session, take a moment to reflect. What's one key takeaway you hope to implement in your own practice? Think about what resonated with you and how you can adapt it to support your own learners in building stronger, more confident responses. On this slide, you can see some of the key takeaways shared by participants during the live session. These responses reflect a real focus on practical classroom strategies, things like using the colour coding to break down extended responses, incorporating real-life scenarios to support application, and designing tasks that clearly link to the assessment objectives. One standout takeaway was the use of WAROL, particularly as a way to show students what a rubbish answer looks like. By filling in the structure poorly, for example, giving vague or generalised responses, students can unpick and see the difference between surface level thinking and the depth required for a higher band answer. So it's not just a planning tool, it's also a valuable prompt for comparison and self-reflection, helping students understand both what to do and what to avoid. If you'd like further support, you can book a curriculum consultation with us. Just complete the short form shown below, and you can access the form using the link at the bottom of the slide. You can also explore and register for upcoming T-level training and events using the link shown here. Events are available across education and early years, health and science and digital, and we hope to see you at one of our events over the coming academic year. Before we finish, we'd really appreciate it if you could take just a few minutes to complete this short feedback form. Your insights are incredibly valuable because they help us improve our content, delivery and usefulness of these recorded on-demand resources. You can simply scan the QR code on screen or follow the link to get started. Thank you in advance for taking the time to share your thoughts with us. Thank you so much for watching. We really do hope you're leaving with a few new strategies or ideas that you feel confident to try out in your own teaching. If you'd like to explore anything further, whether it's support with planning, assessment or delivery, remember there are consultation calls and events available to help. We wish you all the best as you continue to work with your learners, and thank you again for your time and engagement.